Back with Will Von Tagen, commercial director, has his own production company. Produced, released, and distributed 2 feature films. You can find all of that stuff in the links below, so go check him out. And then Will, so what I wanted to ask you about today was, it was very difficult for me early on to distinguish between the craft or the art and that there was a business. And I think when I was young, I knew I wanted to be in the film business, but I didn't think of it as a business. I thought of it as art. And this took a long time. I'm not very bright. This took a long time for me to figure out that there's actually a distinction. And I'm curious, that was a big moment for me. I'm curious if you have any similar experience with understand that, or did you always understand it, in the way you do now?
I don't think I always understood it the way I do now by any means, and I think I'm still coming to understand it more and more as I reach new opportunities. But I would agree that there is a distinction between the two, and I think that the sooner you learn that distinction and also how to manage the difference between the two for yourself, the better off you're going to be. Um, I think the business approach to it is what's going to allow you to partake in the craft of it. I think finding a way to make things happen for yourself and to also use what your abilities are to make things happen for other people are going to continue to open up more and more doors and allow you to grow. And it keeps you from just being the guy making movies in your garage, which is fine. I think at some point you do have to ask yourself, what is your goal with filmmaking? Is it to just keep making personal films for yourself? Is it to make a living for yourself, or do you want to try and reach, the very top tier of filmmaking, making Hollywood features, or even, very good independent features, or doing commercial work, or all of the above, finding a nice balance between the two. And I think really the only way to get there, or the most realistic way to get there, is to learn how to approach it like a business. Um, with the commercial directing, and one thing that I said, I think last time, that I love about it is that, and I see this also being, the advantage to doing short films, is that it gives you the opportunity to kind of fine tune and practice and exercise abilities that you hadn't been able to before. In a lot of the ways with commercials, just because the budget's the way they are, when you're trying to crew up and get, very specialized bits of equipment for a personal film that you're funding yourself, that can get way out of hand very quickly. But if you've got someone else's money and, crew of professionals that have worked with this equipment before, you're going to learn a lot quicker, and there's going to be a lot less risk on you, so that later on when you come back around and you want to do that for yourself, for your own project, you're not going to go into it completely blindly. So I think finding a nice way to balance that will help you out. I think the biggest thing to realize, and what I came to realize, is there's sort of this myth of making it, that you're, and everybody kind of hopes for that you're going to have a slam dunk hit at Sundance. Your art's going to be the wow factor that everyone talks about, and you're going to suddenly be offered the keys to the kingdom. And that does happen, but it's so rare. It's so rare. And if you bank on it, that's just a really unfortunate gamble. You have to be just an absolute genius to pull that off. And the smarter route is to prove to the people that matter that you know what this is all about, what this system is and how it works. And I think the people that I've managed to impress that have helped me in the long run, they don't look at my stuff and think, wow, this guy's a visual genius. They look at it and say, okay, this kid's using a very smart approach in getting these projects off the ground. He's, mitigating his personal risk, and he's delivering for the people that have, helped him get this thing going, who have invested in it. And he's doing it in a very smart way. And that ends up impressing them much more than anything that I could visually put in front of them that came from my mind. So,
When you first got into it, yeah, you understood there's a business component to it, but how were you thinking of it when, you know, when you first set out to make that first feature, you know, before you started having meetings with people and figuring out, oh, raising money is a totally different thing before that? Because it sounds like in your, you know, career that was sort of an aha moment.
Mhm.
How were you thinking about it before, as a 19-year-old, or whatever, 20-year-old?
Yeah, I think I was also still thinking of it sort of how I described. A lot of people start out that I'm going to make something that's going to be fantastic and it's going to open up all the doors. But I think what led me to my first feature, I guess, was a little bit of a business approach, and the idea that even though I thought very firmly that, you know, my first feature would launch myself, the reason why I did it is that I was looking at the number of shorts that are made each year and submitted to film festivals versus what's screened, and the number of features that are made each year and submitted to film festivals and are screened. And, you know, I think Sundance gets like 10,000 short film submissions a year, where they'll maybe get close to 1,000 features. And so I thought, well, you know, pull off a good feature, your odds are a lot better than pulling off a good short and getting screened somewhere. So even though I thought my approach was still going to be just presenting something really great, I kind of started leaning more towards features because I thought it would at least, you know, increase my chances of getting it seen.
That's awesome. I love there was an actual, you did the research, made a plan, as you know, whether it was effective or not, but it was at least something to anchor to.
Yeah.
Because I think you bring up something very interesting, which is the myth. There's sort of the messaging and the myth that the industry and really the media creates, and that
Hmm.
everybody wants. So they just give you more of that. We all, and this culture, society does that with everything. It's the myth of, you know, Steve Jobs. You know, he was the only guy at Apple, you'd think,
Yeah.
you know, designing everything, you know, putting it all together, figuring it all out. And it's like, no, no, no. There were many very important people that he relied on and needed, to make this happen. So we have all these myths of sort of the the lone individual goes off and rules the world, or rules his industry, or comes away from Sundance with some mega deal, um,
Hmm.
which it it doesn't really happen. And but yet that myth is still populating. It's still out there, and it's repeated every year. Every
Hmm.
single year, it's repeated. Are there any other myths in the business, that we might ignore? I mean, that's definitely the biggest one in my mind,
Yeah.
and it's the one that that definitely gets people off track.
Yeah. I think the other one for me is just how much hard work it really is. And I think that when you are, you know, starting out and just making films for fun as a hobby, and you're working with just the people you like, and there's sort of not this pressure there, it's easy to have a good time. And whenever you see, you know, the very well curated behind the scenes footage that comes out from studio films, you know, everybody's smiling and having a good time. And what they're not showing you are the, you know, the 16-hour days and things are breaking and people are screaming at each other, and, you know, it turns into a zoo. um, and so I think, you know, not that you can't find enjoyment in that as well, but I think you need to be a little bit more realistic sometimes about what it's going to be like when you're in that fray. So,
Yeah, yeah.
and if that's something you want to put up with, because I think, you know, I know a lot of people. A friend of mine, she just did her first feature, and they came fresh out of Chapman Film School. He directed, and she had written it. And after he directed his first thing, and they did a great job. It was a little indie film, kind of like my first one. He decided it wasn't for him. It was too much pressure. It wasn't really the enjoyment he thought it was going to be, and he packed up and moved back to Kansas and wants nothing more to do with films. And he's got, you know, 100,000 in student loans that it took him to realize that. So
That is such a great illustration because people do not realize that that's actually the likely trajectory of outcomes.
Hmm.
If you compare that to you're going to go to Sundance with your little indie or your short and be realized as the next, I don't know, Scorsese, whoever is a big deal. Um, Actually, it's his experience is far more typical and is the more likely
Hmm.
outcome. Because it's like, it is brutally stupid long days and for no money.
And those are the fun parts of it. you know, compared to the even worse sessions in the edit bay or trying to sell the thing afterwards. So
What, you didn't go to film school, right?
no.
Yeah. So, it's kind of unfair to have you comment on that. What do you, but you've worked with enough people who've gone to film school.
Yeah.
What do you think the value is?
I think there's a tremendous value if your goal is to go work in the system. I think understanding, as long as you're at a good school that does take the time to teach you that. And I know that there's some of the upper echelon, and I've talked to my friend who went to Chapman about this. She says she wished that they had taught them a little bit more about the grind and less about, what it's going to be like in the writer's room when you make it. Um, but I think that if you can go into it with a little bit more of a realistic understanding, as opposed to what you've just read on, nofilmschool.com about how to rubber band your camera to something. I think there's a lot of value in that. I think you can achieve that elsewhere. I did that and learned by doing, but I think that, if you're clever and it's the route you want to go, I think there's a lot of benefit to it, but it's definitely not the only route.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's an interesting one. Um, I had a really very close friend. I still consider him a close friend, even though we haven't spoken in a long time, but
Mhm.
um, just on different parts of the planet. But he was a fantastic key grip, so talented, and a fantastic. He was working to be a cameraman, and was just extraordinary. Really talented, smart guy, and he still is. And he anyway. He went to AFI. Paid for it, used loans, ended up 100K north, maybe north of that he ended up leaving with a diploma, and he's he went uh, to study cinematography, and now he teaches cinematography. I don't know if that's what he wanted to do. Not, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And he had to teach because as a consequence of the instability of the income in this business, um, having a steady job when you have fixed payments you have to make to service that debt, having a steady teaching job, it becomes very attractive because it's life or death. So,
Yeah.
um, you know,
From what I've observed, if you really want to do film school to learn the craft, try your best to get it from a state school, someplace that's not going to charge you a whole lot, and you'll probably get quite a lot of good stuff out of it. If you're adamant about going to a USC or an NYU, the real caveat of coming out of one of those, I think, are the potential connections you can make post graduation. So if you're there and you find yourself in a position to go to that school, your number one focus should be networking with alumnus, with connections that are tied to the school, so that when you're done, you've got an easier route to getting a job. I think if you're going to choose it, make it that.
I think that's a huge point. How important are connections or just knowing people? You know, just knowing a handful of people that are in the business as professionals and working.
I think it depends on where you put your weight, what you consider to be important. I've gotten to know some very cool people, some very important people in the biz, but none of them have just directly given me a job, and I've directly asked for it, and it hasn't happened. But at the same time, I've learned a ton from them, and their attention definitely was encouraging for me at times to, continue pushing forward. So I think, knowing people is an important factor to it, but I think you don't have to know the people right away going into it. You're going to get to know them as you do it, as long as you stick around doing it. And you never know where one relationship is going to lead. It could be something that doesn't get realized until years later.
Very true. Yeah. Um, so if well, back to the craft versus the business. Do you what do you see as your craft, and should people focus on one thing? Whether it's a director, an editor, da da da.
I think you should focus on one thing. I think be prepared to know as much as you can about everything, but have the one thing that when someone asks you what you do, you can tell them exactly what it is. And I've kind of found myself being more in the producer role. I think just what I've been pushed into to have to get the things off the ground, it's taught me a lot of very valuable skills that I think a lot of people don't have. And so I've come to learn that is my most marketable thing. Directing is the thing I do want to do the most, but if someone kind of approaches me professionally, I generally will tell them I'm a producer. So, it's valuable because, even just the other day, I'm working on building this roster for my production company, and I was perusing Vimeo, trying to find commercial directors. And then you're looking at people's, they're allowed to choose what they focus on. And there's, one person will list cinematographer, editor, VFX guy, writer. And you're just trying to figure out, well, what is it that you actually do? And when I look at your spots, what was your contribution to that? Did you direct this or did you edit it? So I think if you want to be found by someone who wants to hire you, you need to know exactly what it is that you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, with the business of, maybe explain to people the business of a commercial production company. How's it actually work? From who comes with the job? Is it an ad agency? Is it a business? Is it how do projects start and conclude?
I think it depends on the budget range and the market that you're working in. And since coming back to Boise, I've been trying to relearn, sort of the ecosystem here, how it's going. And I've noticed that it's very, I don't want to say small time, but I guess kind of small time, where there are production companies that will take on the creative and try and reach out directly to businesses and get that stuff off the ground. But the way it's traditionally run, and sort of what my goal is with my company, what I want to try and turn it into, is that the clients are working directly with their ad agencies, the people that are doing their creative. And even depending on the brand, it's spread out. HP has a agency for printers, they have a separate agency for laptops, they have a separate agency for all these different things that focus on the one specific branch of their company. And they're creating, the creative approaches for that. And even there, it could be split up between print and, digital media. But the creative agency will be drafting the campaigns, making the copy, and pitching it to the clients. And once they get a sign off on something specific, then they'll start reaching out to the production companies to bid on it. And they usually have a variety of production companies that they've partnered and worked with, each one, with a specialization or with a director that has a specialization. That's what they're looking for. So if it's HP and it's laptops, maybe there's, 3 tech-based production companies that they've worked with in the past that they like their work, and they give them essentially the copy and say, we're going to produce this commercial for HP. They may specify the budget. They may ask for them to bid on the budget, and they'll say, we want you to have your directors give us a realization of what they would do with this copy. And then each director will kind of be given the briefing of it. Sometimes if they're with a good production company, the production company will give them resources that'll help them look up pictures and build their mood boards and their lookbooks so that they're very nice and fancy and presentable to the clients and to the ad agency. And once those are all in, The production company will look at what the director has drafted and build a budget around it, add a little bit on top for themselves. Then they'll pass it off to the agency. The agency will look at it. They'll add a little bit more budget to it for themselves, pass it off to the client and present them. And then the client will generally pick, which director, which budget, which realization that they like the best. And then they get signed off down the line. And then the director gets hired with the production company. The production company takes care of producing the commercial. And typically both the agency and the client will be on set during the creation of that. And, they'll be making decisions and changing their minds shot by shot sometimes. Supervise it through the edit until it's finally delivered. So it's kind of, a chain of command, I guess you could call it.
So
And that's,
yeah, go ahead.
and I think that's the ideal way of doing it. And if you want to kind of get in on this, and that's been my goal over the past couple of years, is to try and get rostered as a director for a production company that works within that workflow. And the company that I'm starting now is also trying to structure itself that way, where we're reaching out to directors with specific talents.
That's what I was going to ask you. With your production company, I know a lot of them will focus on, they're really strong at comedy. Why? Because they have a stable of directors who are very good at that, and or silence or something, or even animation production companies, and they can be very niche specific. So yeah, what do you want your production company to be? What do you want it to be? And do you want to direct? And what kind of directors do you want to work with? If you don't want to direct, if you just want to produce, what do you want?
I think as I'm building it out, I'm kind of answering some of those questions for myself, because like I said, at the same time, I'm also trying to get rostered with a production company too. And being back in Boise, I think with the way Boise is growing, it's a smart move for me to try and structure it this way. But a lot of people I've already been talking to are saying, you should just make yourself an agency and take over the creative, and then approach clients directly. And I don't really want to manage anything that big right now. I think right now that I am technically the only director on board with it. Well, we just signed another guy, but his focus is kind of comedy lifestyle, and my focus lately has been tech and esports. And there's a girl we're going to approach who does sort of stop motion overhead shot animation type things, with cardboard paper cutouts. And she's got a great reel. She's worked with Warner Brothers for like Looney Tunes merchandise, and I don't know, some just really cool brands that I think would be great for our roster, someone to offer. There's another girl out of Portland. She's Chinese, has been living in the States for a while, and she's kind of got this very stylized, vivid. She's done a few things for DJI and Adobe, but they're longer form spots. They're like, 2-minute things where it's this cardboard paper cutout guy walking around on this desk and interacting with this drone that's woken up. And I think that given that I might be steering the ship for the while, and where we are with HP and Micron being local, I think definitely sort of the tech stuff will probably be the start of what we end up doing the most of.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Can you now run a production company and have people all over?
Yeah. I think that's, I think as you're getting started, it's good to be at a place where this was true a year ago, could have your face-to-face meetings with the companies you're trying to sign with. But for the most part, the work that we're trying to do, unless you're a very big production company or a big agency, you're not shooting 5 things at once. You're kind of getting the gigs one by one, or maybe 2 by 2 as they're coming in. And so you don't need in-house staff. You don't need people that are there every day. And generally, once you get something that's a big fish, the budget's big enough that you're going to be able to fly in your director or your cinematographer to have them in town for, a week. And I think especially now that everyone's gotten so used to doing things, remotely, I think it's even made that more of a possibility.
Right on, right on. Well, so are you exclusively focused on the commercial production company, or are you writing another script, or what do you are you doing anything else with narrative stuff?
Yeah, right now I just finished shooting stuff for a sizzle and a pilot for a reality TV show that I want to pitch that I think has a good shot at getting some legs underneath it. Um, Again, that's something that if it takes off, which I think it's got a moderately good chance at it, I don't want to be saddled with it for the next 7 years. So I'd like to kind of, be on it more as the producer and get it structured in a way that as it if it takes off and it's successful, I can kind of step away further and further as it moves on and does its thing and kind of set it up as a nice, let it do what it needs to do. Yeah, I want to get back into narrative film. I've got a few script ideas that I'm bouncing around. I think I'll take my time a little bit more on those. The last movie I did took a very long time to finish up, and I think it taught me a lot of lessons about just making sure things are a little bit more ready to go before jumping into it. And I think a lot of that has to do with me just being more stable as a person, as the person heading up the project, so that when shit hits the fan, I'm not you know strapped for cash and at the end of my rope trying to just get this thing finished, that I have some fallbacks to kind of keep me going in the event that that happens. So
Um, so I thought you, as a first-time producer, like you clearly have the skill set of a producer. And do you enjoy it, and two, what are those skills?
yeah, I really enjoy it. um I think it's the fun thing about it is just getting to work with so many different people who have so many different strengths and talents, you know. Um, and my producer hat has generally been more in the creative side of things. I've gotten to have a lot of creative say over some things that I've gotten off the ground. Um, I think the biggest key to it is just being able to communicate really well, both your ideas and your wants, making them clear to other people, but then as issues arise, as problems arise, how you communicate with the root sources of those problems to navigate them and solve them and make sure that everything's still moving fluidly. Whether you're trying to renegotiate a budget or crew or deadlines or whatever it might be, that there's a kink in the hose. The way you get out of that is through finding solutions, through communicating. So
Um, which would you rather be doing?
what do you mean?
Well, producing or directing. If you
It's
can't do
hard to
both.
say. I know I don't want to do both, but it's hard to say because I don't. I've had the opportunity to only produce on a project or produce and direct, and I haven't had too many opportunities to direct where I'm not also involved to some extent um, on the producing. So the person who's usually telling me no as a director is myself. So I don't really know what that frustration might be like to be getting the no's from somebody else and then not having any control over that. I guess if someone came to me right now and said, you have a choice. You can either only produce now for the rest of your life, but be very successful, or you can only direct, but still kind of struggle with it. I'd probably take the producing route. I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. It's it's just interesting. It's, I think like everybody gets into it thinking, oh, I'm going to be an actor. And then the second one is a director, and it usually
Yeah.
follows in succession.
Yeah.
and then you actually realize what your inherent skill sets are.
Mm-hmm.
It just takes time. It takes a lot longer, especially it takes a lot longer to change our minds
Mm-hmm.
as to what we think we're supposed to be doing versus what we're actually skilled at. I mean,
Yeah.
I've just known so many people who go in thinking they're going to be actors and directors, and some of them, a lot of them still are.
I think what I've come to really like about producing is that the problems you find in that role have definitive answers. Whereas directing, a lot of the time, your problems are, let's try this and let's try this, and you're solving by, fumbling and putting things together. Where producing, you hit a problem, you kind of know immediately where you can go and how you can go to fix it. And I like that. That makes it for a much more level working
Gosh,
experience.
I love that. I've never thought of it that way. That's a brilliant way to understand it. And I think I'm more drawn to that as well. I like the solving for X with all the unknowns if you're with the right people. If you're
Yes.
not with the right people and you're solving for X and there's no clear way to get to it, it can be pretty unpleasant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a brilliant way to think about the difference of producing, is that there are answers. There are, very, very clear answers. And just, do you have the will, the time and money?
Yeah.
Um, interesting. What, you know, I guess this has kind of been about people who want to get into this and do this. What would you have wanted? Going back, what would you do differently, or one would have wanted to do differently in
Become
starting?
become a veterinarian. um, what I've done differently. It's hard to say, because what a lot of people in this business define or look at as success is, like we said at the top of this, very much a fairy tale. You know, um, yeah, I really want to reach a peak of excellence with my career. Um, and I know a lot of people that see what I'm doing, it still looks like I'm kind of just fumbling around, but in reality, like, I've had a lot of really great success and I've come a long ways. And I think the fact that, 10, 15 years that I've been pushing for this, that I'm still in it and at a point where I'm making a living off of it and working with interesting brands, interesting people, and can speak back on it with confidence from the experience. I think that does show that, I'm being successful at it. So it's hard to say that I should have done things differently. Definitely, there's some struggles that I went through that I would have liked to have avoided, but I don't know that they ever would have been avoidable. Like I keep jumping back to my second film and just sort of how it ran off the rails, and unfortunate that was. And I wish I had taken more time prepping for that. But at the same time, like, I did learn a lot through fixing that movie. And I do a YouTube channel, and one of my unfortunately it's my least viewed video, but my favorite video I've ever done was how to reshoot a movie. And I really just talk about all the different things you can get away with. That if you go into the movie at the beginning understanding these tricks, it would make your life 10 times easier. But it's also just amazing to know how you can fix things retroactively, that I never would have learned any of that had I not had to be in that situation. So
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, I mean, the films you did, the two features, it does seem like you can go to film school and do that, or you can go make a feature.
Hmm. Yeah.
I think I would, if anybody ever asked, which they won't, but yeah, go make a feature. That's, it's it's where all the answers are.
Yeah, well, I think more than that, make a feature and and let it take the time that it's going to need to take. Because I do think a lot of people get into it thinking they're going to wrap this up in 9 months and move on. So, um,
Well, that, and also, and I think this goes on into the business on every job, until you learn professionally to manage it, which is it's never going to be perfect or what you think it's going to be. It never looks the way you have it in your head.
yeah,
It just doesn't, and it never will. It's not. I, I think you can spend an inordinate amount of time not understanding that and running the hamster wheel.
hmm
When
it's
did
a weird
Yeah.
it's a weird mix because you have to understand and accept those flaws, that it's going to be like that for you, but you still have to go into it with the hope that it's going to be the best thing possible. I mean, my friend Richard said that to me. He said, if you're not going into this thinking that you're making The Godfather, then why are you even doing it? But at the same time, when you're done and it isn't The Godfather, you need to be able to accept that and understand that that's likely going to be what it is. But you have to really tackle it and believe in it to the extent that that's what it's going to be.
I 100% agree. Yeah, 100%. I think it's true of anything.
Yeah.
I have seen people, and I know I've done it myself, is you just spending way too much time on a scene or a setup that really, guys, we should realize what the real circumstances are, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
That is such a difficult balance between that. And I don't know if
Yeah.
if you've ever experienced that.
I have. And I think, to go with that is understanding when to call it, when you might be beat, and rather than slamming your head trying to fix it in that moment, to step back, regroup, and approach it later. I mean, I think back a lot on that shoot we were on for Almosting It. We were in the school cafeteria and the girl was like serving lemonade, and I was supposed to like trip and knock over her stand and have this very awkward conversation. And we were there very late, and everyone was just starting to get very frustrated and yelling at each other, and it just wasn't working. Nothing was working. And then we finally just called it that night. And then I think you and I sat down and just thought, where can we go? What can we do to still shoot this scene, but to just have it be much more simple to shoot? And then, I think we just moved the schedule around, went back one night to a different location, and just had it happen in the parking lot where the mess had already happened and my character came in to have the introduction, and it worked great. So
Yeah, it's such a difficult thing to have in your head, and it's just not going to happen that night or day. It's just the
mhm.
setup just doesn't, for whatever reason. And being able to let go and regroup, and that's absolutely probably one of the core skills to, or core ways of thinking that um, should should help to advance things.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm interested in. It's all of these things that, and I can see how they're applied to any kind of business, and it really doesn't matter. But with film, you learn how to work with people. You learn how to manage resources, manage time, um, manage expectations. Um, and under extreme time pressure, I think it's unlike, the time pressure is unlike anything else, and because the stakes are so high. um, for the moment, it's just not the same thing as making tacos.
No,
If
it's
some people
opening a
don't,
restaurant with never testing the menu.
right, right, yeah, yeah, and every job is like that. Um, you know, that's why the prep is so important. How is your thinking about prep changed, even from the days of doing the indies to the commercial? What's is there a difference in how you're doing it?
Hmm. It's hard to think back on how I used to do it. Um, I think because now I know the things that might go wrong a little bit better, uh, the challenges that may pop up, what's realistic to expect within a day, or in certain circumstances, what types of shots are going to take longer, um, what type of locations aren't going to photograph well, figuring out, is the sun going to be actually blaring on this window the entire morning? And we scouted in the afternoon, so we didn't think it was going to be a problem, you know. So I think just having seen all the things that go wrong and then making sure those are on my mind when I'm prepping has changed that process a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just it's an experience. You just got to do it, do
Hmm.
it, and find a. But in the commercial world, you're also asked to present a
Yeah.
much more comprehensive, uh, relative to a no budget self-funded indie.
Sure. Yeah. There's no one you're really answering to but yourself on the no budget stuff. I don't know. Do you want me to talk a little bit more about like prepping for a commercial or?
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
Um, yeah, you have to be so much more fluid, and you have to have a lot of extra ideas in your back pocket that you're willing to burn, because you're, at the end of the day, what yeah, to some extent you've been hired for your expertise and what you're able to bring to the table, but at the end of the day, it's, are you delivering the expectations of the client and the agency that wrote the copy that you're now transforming for them. um, and maybe you misunderstood the brief, or you thought you were going to try something a little bit differently, but you have to, as visually as possible, show them this is what it's going to be. You don't want surprises. They don't want surprises. They want to know what they're buying up front. And I think, commercials are so much more similar to a larger budget film than you would realize. You're not just showing up and blasting out shots and finding your angles the day of. You've got that all figured out to save time, but also because the client needs to know how this is going to look when it's pieced together in the end. I think in post there can be some flexibility, because then you again can visually show them differences within the cut and they can say yes or no. But if you're getting ready to actually go into the shoot, you need to be sure that pretty much everything you've done has been signed off on. And it'll be double checked because, like I said before, the client will usually be on set with you, watching over your shoulder everything you're doing. And they'll bring up, you didn't talk about this before. Why are you suddenly doing this now? And you better have a good answer for it, um, or plenty of time to burn. But yeah, you're building mood boards. So I guess like right now, I'm getting ready to build some mood boards for the shoot that we're doing, and I'm taking over from someone else. Project was already started, and they've already done a round of mood boards. And so the feedback from the client was, we like the color schemes and lighting structure of these round of boards, but we like the set design and overall feel from these. So now I'm going to kind of go in and find a way to sort of combine those two and find as many visual references as possible, so that they can see it and have a better understanding of what we're going to build for them and what we're going to craft it, and they can strike things out, or highlight, we like the fact that the shadows in the background are much darker, or that, the neon that we're going to be bringing in is it prominent and close to the subject, or is it kind of a detail in the background? And that's how we're deriving the color palette for them. And just kind of get that stuff all answered so that when you show up on the set, and especially now because I'm actually going to be working with a remote production company, I'm not going to be on set at all. I have to be able to communicate that explicitly to them so that they can build it to the exact expectations of the client. And that, we're not wasting a day with me on Zoom instructing them how to dress the set, that they can look at all the references I've sent them and do exactly what we're wanting to have done.
It's such a different thing than an indie. It's
Yeah.
not even comparable. Some people don't respond well to that, but you've taken to it. You enjoy it. You like it.
I do. Yeah. I mean, there's times it gets maddening, when you're at the very end and they're wanting to add end slates, and you've already, somehow managed to cram everything into a nice, 25 seconds with a 5-second end slate, and suddenly they want to add 3 more seconds. And you're like, do you realize how hard it's going to be to cut these final 3 seconds out of 25? Or they want things added else, so there are problems to solve that are maddening, but there's also ones that it's also very fun to try and, dial in precisely what it is that they're wanting, and, hopefully exceeding the expectation.
That's great. What have you read? Is there a book or several books that or I don't even know. Are you even a reader?
Yeah. I'm not as much as I used to be, but I do love reading books that help me in this field. Yeah. And there's some damn good ones out there that I do love to recommend. If we're talking commercial, the 30-second storyteller is very, very valuable. It really does break down, for you, especially if you're trying to break into it, what you can expect, what you need to do, getting a spec reel shot, picking your niche, defining the different niches, what it's going to be like working with a client, what sort of problems you're going to run into. And, I think until you try and do a 30 or 60-second spot, you don't realize how difficult it can be to tell an engaging story or share a message within that time crunch. And then you learn a very big respect for ads that really kill it, once you've done it. But that's a fantastic book, 30-second storyteller. As far as I think understanding the business, it's a little bit dated now, and I think it's even you can only buy it used, unfortunately. But there's a great book called The Hollywood Economist. And I mean, it's a little bit dated because now that streaming is such a huge thing, he doesn't quite fully get into that, since it went out of print, or they stopped printing new editions. But he does a fantastic job of just breaking down, box office, popcorn culture, how that really impacts making movies, what movies actually cost, how you're able to, negotiate and find alternative sources of funding. He uses a lot of great examples. I think it was Tomb Raider. He says, on paper it cost the studio, I think, like 120 million, but then after product placement, tax incentives, all these different things, pre-sales, foreign pre-sales, Fox only paid like 20 million to produce it. And that's the stuff you don't really think about or realize. So I think that's a great book to understand the business of film and film financing, because especially if you're going to be out there raising your own money for a project and you're going to be speaking to investors, they do want to know, like, what is the actual avenue that they're going to be getting a return on their investment. And I think you need to have a good way to answer any question they might throw at you, because they are going to ask, what if this never goes to theatrical, or, you plan on selling DVDs, is that even lucrative anymore? Stuff like that.
Anything else?
If you're wanting to go to the indie stuff, Independent Ed is a book by Ed Burns, which is just a fantastic, fantastic book on very small, low budget indie stuff. You know, if you're wanting to just get a couple things shot and practice your craft, he does give you a great example of how to do high quality work with small teams, small schedules, next to no money. Ed Burns has had a really fantastic career, you know, winning Sundance and then going on to make some larger projects, not really having the success that he wanted, and then kind of circling it back down to just making the smaller films and then finding self-distribution platforms that have, you know, found a way to sustain itself. I think, you know, the Duplass brothers had sort of a similar model that they follow. And then another really great book for learning how to produce is called Producer to Producer. And that one's great. It comes also with worksheets and, you know, budget software downloads for free with the book. And that one really talks to you about the nitty gritty stuff of producing a film and the business side and contracts and understanding SAG and all that stuff.
Right on. That's no, that's great. That's great. So just real quick before we wrap it up, what are you guys openly soliciting for reels from directors, or what? How are you? What's your process? Do you want to get some commercial
Yeah.
sizzle reels, or what are you looking for? And
Um,
who? What kind of work?
well, right now I'm being very picky about it, and I want to try and get at least 3 directors on the roster before we do the big outreach to the local agencies. And here locally, we've just about exhausted, you know, who we're going to reach out to, just because we want to be sure that it's going to be like sometimes you go to I mean, I've done this when I've done casting for commercials, but you'll go to a modeling site, and on the actual site they'll show the best of the best that they have on their roster that they work with. But then actually, if you write them, they'll send you more that aren't featured. And so I think we'll have a few local people that we will have to offer clients that, you know, might not, if they're wanting something lower budget, that we can work with. But the people that we want to have featured sort of on the website are people that really have a good understanding of commercials, so that you know, they're easy to work with to that capacity, but then also have worked with bigger brands, just because that adds a lot of validity to the offering. So what I've been doing lately is just sort of perusing through Vimeo, looking for people, and I'll reach out. I'll try and find out if they're already signed somewhere, and if they are, asking if they're exclusive. If they're not exclusive, would they like to come on board? And basically, I just say, you know, we're starting up this new production company, and we're looking to build our roster featuring specialists. And, you know, there's this one girl I wrote, you know, her food stuff is just phenomenal. I just said, you know, your food work is great. I would love to have you on our roster as a food director, so we can try and, you know, get you work with prospective clients. I see you're already signed with this company. Is it exclusive? And if not, you know, let's continue this conversation. So yeah, we're looking for people that obviously work in niches, preferably higher demand niches, but that's going to be tough to do. And just have really high quality work and the experience, so that when we do get these bookings, it's not learning as we were going. So I mean, it's a big ask, you know, and especially since we're not being able to sign and give guarantees, you know, we're just kind of asking people to let us rep them, more or less. But
Where
we're
can they?
looking for DOPs and directors. So
Right on. Um, yeah, send reels to Will
yeah,
at your website. What's the production company website?
yeah, it's amberwoodcreative.com.
Okay.
And you can also email us at amberwoodcreative@gmail.com.
Okay, and we'll put links to that down below,
Yeah.
um, and links to Heritage and Almost in it and that. Um, so thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
man.
Yeah, I
Always good to
love
chat.
I always love talking to you. Um, But yeah, let's do it again. If nothing else, it's a great way to stay in touch.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, get to it, and I'll talk at you soon.
Thanks, man. Be
All
well.
right. Take care.